The twin suns of Kepler 442b cast dancing rainbows through the massive crystalline spires that stretched into the purple sky. Ambassador Kim Tae-ho stood at the observation deck, watching hundreds of spacecraft from across the galaxy descend like metallic birds toward the landing platforms. Some ships gleamed like liquid mercury, others pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and a few seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, their edges blurring reality itself. "Look at that beauty," whispered Lee Min-ho, pointing at a vessel. That resembled a giant flower made of pure energy. "The Botanical Collective always knows how to make an entrance." Tae-ho nodded, adjusting the collar of his simple grey diplomatic uniform. Unlike the elaborate ceremonial armor worn by the Zephyrian delegates or the flowing energy cloaks of the Void Speakers, human attire remained modest. Earth's philosophy had always been simple: let actions speak louder than appearance. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with activity as thousands of beings filled the floating platforms. Tentacled creatures from the deep ocean worlds swam through gravity-controlled water spheres. Silicon-based life forms clinked like living crystals as they walked. Gaseous beings contained within force fields drifted overhead, their voices creating haunting melodies that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Lieutenant Park So-young moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her hand resting casually on her ceremonial sidearm. The weapon hadn't been fired in decades. It was more symbol than tool in this age of eternal peace. Yet something about the way she carried herself suggested she knew exactly how to use it if needed. 50,000 years of peace, Tae-ho murmured to Min-ho, as they watched a group of robotic entities perform a synchronized greeting dance with organic delegates. "Sometimes I wonder what our ancestors were thinking during the old days. All those stories about galactic wars seem like fairy tales now." A creature that looked like a floating jellyfish made of starlight drifted past them. Vashatar of the Ethereal. Collective moved with impossible grace, its translucent body shifting between colors that had no names in human language. As it passed the human delegation, its attention seemed to slide right over them, as if they weren't worth noticing. This wasn't unusual. Most galactic species viewed humans as the newcomers, a young race that had barely learned to leave their home system when the great civilizations were already millions of years old. Earth had been granted a seat at the galactic table more out of politeness than respect. "The Arcturian ambassador looks nervous," So-young observed, nodding toward a tall, blue-skinned humanoid whose gills fluttered rapidly. "Third time he's checked the security protocols in the last hour." Tae-ho followed her gaze. The Arcturians were known for their caution, but this level of anxiety seemed excessive for a peace celebration. Around them, other delegates seemed unusually jumpy too. The normally confident Keith warriors kept glancing at shadows, and even the ancient Keeper Collective's representatives appeared restless. Deep beneath their feet, in the station's heavily shielded core, banks of quantum computers hummed with activity. These systems had been installed after the Great Purge, designed to monitor for any signs of the legendary destroyers, mythical beings that had once terrorized the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing 50 millennia ago. Technician Quelnox, a spider-like being with 12 delicate manipulator arms, noticed unusual readings on his displays. Every time the scanners swept over the human delegation, warning symbols flashed across his screens. Ancient protocols, coded in languages so old that most species had forgotten they ever existed, triggered alert after alert. "These readings can't be right," Quelnox muttered, his compound eyes reflecting the warning lights. He ran the scans again, but the results remained the same. According to the deepest security systems, the human delegation registered as something far more dangerous than peaceful diplomats. But that was impossible. Everyone knew humans were harmless. They'd proven it through decades of trade negotiations and cultural exchanges. Their greatest contribution to galactic civilization had been something called pizza and entertainment broadcasts, featuring dramatic stories about imaginary conflicts. Quelnox dismissed the alerts as system errors. The old war-era programming probably couldn't properly categorize a species it had never encountered before. He made a note to update the databases after the summit ended. Far beyond the station's sensor range, in the empty void between star systems, something stirred. Ancient machines hidden in asteroids and forgotten nebulae detected familiar energy signatures for the first time in 50,000 years. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as space debris began powering up. Sleeper ships, drifting in the darkness of interstellar space, felt their crews beginning to wake from impossibly long slumbers. The galaxy had spent 50 millennia celebrating the disappearance of its greatest nightmare. None of them realized they had been celebrating too soon. The destroyers hadn't been eliminated. They had simply been waiting, growing stronger, preparing for the day when they would be needed again. And that day was closer than anyone imagined. Titu, Peace Summit was in full swing when the first explosion shattered the crystalline walls. Kim Tae-ho was discussing trade routes with a delegation of insect-like beings when the station's lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in angry red light. "What was that?" asked the lead insectoid, its antennae twitching nervously. Before anyone could answer, the main assembly hall's massive doors exploded inward. Through the smoke and debris came figures that made the blood freeze in every delegate's veins. Keth Dominion warriors, but not like any seen in living memory. These raiders wore armor that seemed to drink light itself, and their weapons hummed with energy signatures that belonged to a forgotten age. The lead Keth warrior raised a weapon that looked like it had been carved from a dying star. Energy erupted. From its barrel, not the clean plasma bolts of modern warfare, but something far more terrifying. The beam didn't just destroy, it erased. Where it touched, matter simply ceased to exist, leaving behind wounds in reality itself. Delegates screamed and scattered in every direction. The elegant Zephyrian crystals shattered from pure fear, their fragments singing death songs. Gaseous beings tried to escape through ventilation systems, only to find Keth raiders waiting for them there too. Evacuation protocols. Now. Tae-ho's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, but something was different about his tone. The mild-mannered diplomat was gone, replaced by someone who spoke with absolute authority that made even panicking aliens stop and listen. Lieutenant Park So-young moved through the madness with movements that defied physics. As energy blasts screamed past her head, she seemed to bend and flow like water, each motion perfectly calculated. A Keth raider's weapon tracked her position, but she was never where the targeting system said she should be. The strangest part wasn't just her speed, it was how natural it looked, like she'd been doing this dance of death for centuries, instead of spending her career filing diplomatic reports. A massive Keth warrior, his armor crackling with stolen energy, cornered a group of terrified delegates near the main viewing port. His blade, forged from some unknown metal that seemed to cut through space itself, swept down toward an elderly Arcturian ambassador. Park's hand intercepted the strike. Her fingers, which should have been severed instantly, caught the warrior's wrist instead. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the chamber as she twisted with surgical precision. The Keth warrior's arm snapped like a dry branch, his scream of pain lost in the larger chaos. For just a moment, Park's eyes blazed with something that made nearby witnesses step back in terror. It wasn't anger or fear, it was something far older and more dangerous, the look of a predator that had been pretending to be prey. "How did you move that fast?" gasped the Arcturian diplomat, his gills fluttering with shock. "And your strength, that's impossible for a human." But Park was already gone, flowing through the battle like liquid lightning. Her movements weren't just efficient, they were perfect. Every step placed her exactly where she needed to be. Every gesture conserved energy while maximizing effect. From across the chamber, Captain Yoon Jae-min emerged from a side corridor where he'd been escorting civilian staff to safety. 3 Keth raiders blocked his path, their weapons trained on him. Instead of reaching for his sidearm, Jae-min simply walked forward. The first raider fired. Jae-min's head tilted slightly, and the energy blast missed by millimeters. The second and third shots followed, but somehow Jae-min was never quite where they expected him to be. He moved like he could see the future, each step carrying him closer to his enemies. When he reached the first raider, Jaemin's hand moved in a blur, not a punch, but something more precise, a touch that sent the warrior crashing into the wall, with enough force to leave a crater in the reinforced metal. The second raider swung his blade, but Jae-min caught it bare-handed, the edge stopping inches from his throat. With his free hand, he tapped the raider's chest, and the warrior simply collapsed. The third raider, seeing his companions fall, turned to run. Jae-min didn't pursue, he simply picked up a piece of debris and threw it. The chunk of metal flew with impossible accuracy, striking the fleeing warrior's weapon and sending it spinning. Away! High above the battle, on the observation deck that had somehow remained intact, Archivist HFY watched through multiple eyes that could process information across 17 different spectrums. What it saw made its ethereal form tremble with recognition and terror. The humans weren't fighting like desperate diplomats trying to survive. They moved with the fluid precision of apex predators, their every action calculated for maximum efficiency. These weren't the movements of a peaceful species. They were techniques described in the oldest, most classified archives of the galaxy. Files that were sealed because they contained records of the destroyers. HFY's tendrils danced across its portable data core, pulling up fragments of ancient text. The descriptions matched perfectly. They moved like death itself, anticipating every attack before it came. No wasted motion, no mercy, no hesitation. As the battle raged below, more human security personnel arrived. Each one displayed the same impossible skills, the same perfect combat instincts. They didn't fight like soldiers, they fought like forces of nature. The Keth raiders, despite their superior numbers and ancient weapons, began to retreat. They had come expecting easy prey and found something that their genetic memory warned them to fear. The emergency bunkers beneath Kepler 442b station hummed with desperate activity as survivors huddled in the reinforced chambers. HFY floated in the deepest vault, its ethereal tendrils interfacing directly with the ancient archive systems that hadn't been accessed since the Great Purge ended 50,000 years ago. The security seals fought back like living things, quantum encryptions that seemed almost sentient in their resistance. But the attack had triggered protocols older than most galactic civilizations, and one by one, the forbidden files began to unlock. Data streamed through HFY's consciousness in fragments that made its translucent form flicker with alarm. Coordinates that had been classified beyond the highest security levels, genetic profiles encoded in mathematics that hurt to comprehend, and star charts showing the location where the most dangerous beings in galactic history had been exiled. The numbers aligned with terrifying precision. Earth's solar system sat exactly to the decimal point where the destroyers had been banished 50 millennia ago. "This cannot be," HFY whispered, its voice creating ripples in the emergency lighting. But the evidence was undeniable. Every calculation pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The humans weren't descendants of some primitive species. They were the children of the galaxy's greatest nightmare. 3 sectors away, on a peaceful trading station, orbiting Proxima Centauri, automated systems that hadn't moved in living memory suddenly came online. The station's central spire, which millions of tourists had admired as a monument to human artistic achievement, began to unfold like a metal flower. Hidden weapons emerged from what everyone had thought were decorative elements, energy conduits, that had been disguised as artistic lighting, blazed to life with enough power to crack planets. On Earth itself, the changes were even more dramatic. The Seoul Defense Tower, a beloved cultural landmark where families took pictures and children played in the gardens below, began its transformation. The tower's elegant curves were actually sophisticated armor plating. What looked like windows were sensor arrays. The peaceful gardens concealed missile batteries that could track targets across star systems. Citizens watched in amazement as their world revealed its true nature. The pyramids of Giza rotated on hidden mechanisms, exposing quantum cannon arrays that had been built into their cores. Mount Rushmore's stone faces split apart to reveal a command center that could coordinate fleets across half the galaxy. Even the Statue of Liberty raised her torch higher, the flame igniting with energies that made nearby space shimmer like heat waves. Dr. Cho Hye-jin was treating wounded delegates in the medical bay when she felt the change begin. It started as a tingling in her fingertips like static electricity, but quickly became something far more profound. Her hands seemed to know things they had never learned, pressure points on alien anatomies she'd never studied, healing techniques that worked on species she'd never encountered. When a crystalline being shattered from shock trauma, her fingers moved without conscious thought, manipulating energy fields she shouldn't have been able to see. The creature's fragments reassembled themselves under her touch, guided by knowledge that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. Kim Tae-ho experienced the awakening differently. He was coordinating evacuation efforts when memories that weren't his own flooded his mind. Battle strategies spanning multiple galaxies, tactical knowledge accumulated over centuries of warfare, command protocols for fleets that numbered in the millions. The mild-mannered diplomat found himself analyzing the station's layout with the eyes of a military genius. He could see weak points in the structure that hadn't been apparent before, optimal defensive positions, ways to turn the peaceful conference center into an impregnable fortress. "Sir, are you all right?" Lee Min-ho asked, noticing his superior's distant expression. Tae-ho blinked, returning to the present, but the knowledge remained, settling into his consciousness like it had always been there. "Better than all right," he said, his voice carrying new authority. "Contact all human vessels in the system. Tell them to assume defensive positions around the station. But sir, we only have 3 diplomatic ships. They're not even armed." Tae-ho smiled, and for a moment Min-ho saw something ancient and terrible in his expression. "Check again." As if responding to his words, the 3 elegant human vessels began their own transformations. Hull panels slid away to reveal weapon batteries that belonged in nightmares. Engines that had seemed designed for peaceful travel reconfigured themselves for combat maneuvers that would crush any living crew. Except these crews weren't entirely living anymore. Lieutenant Park So-young felt the change most intensely. Her enhanced reflexes, which had seemed impressive during the battle, were nothing compared to what was awakening now. She could perceive time differently, seeing the paths of particles in the air, feeling the electromagnetic fields that surrounded every living being. When she looked at her hands, she could see energy patterns flowing through her cells, patterns that matched no known human biology. These weren't random mutations or evolutionary adaptations. They were designed features, engineered abilities that had been sleeping in human DNA for 50,000 years. Captain Yoon Jae-min stood in the security center, watching displays that showed human installations across the galaxy coming online. Each activation sent chills through the monitoring equipment as weapons that could sterilize solar systems prepared for use. "The Keth attack wasn't random," he said to his team, knowledge flowing from sources he couldn't name. "They were testing us." Someone wanted to see what would happen if humans were threatened. Tech specialist Bae Sung-ho looked up from his console, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain, I'm reading energy signatures from Earth that don't make sense. The planet's entire surface is lit up like a weapon." Jaemin nodded grimly. The awakening was spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Across human space, ordinary people were discovering abilities they never knew they possessed. Farmers were reconfiguring agricultural equipment into military hardware. Teachers were developing tactical insights that rivaled the greatest strategic minds in galactic history, but the most terrifying realization was yet to come. As Zephi's research continued in the bunker below, cross-referencing genetic markers with historical records, one fact emerged that changed everything. The humans hadn't just inherited the legacy of the destroyers. According to the deepest archives, they were the destroyers, the same beings who had terrorized the galaxy 50 millennia ago, reborn in new bodies, but carrying the same impossible abilities. The galaxy's greatest peace had been built on a lie. The monsters had never been defeated. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to remember who they really were, and that moment had finally arrived. The moment the Keth invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace, they knew something was terribly wrong. Their sensors screamed, warnings they couldn't understand. The small blue planet they'd come to conquer was surrounded by ships that defied every law of physics they knew. General Han Dong-woo stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the enemy fleet with cold satisfaction. Just 3 days ago, he'd been filing routine reports and drinking bitter coffee in a cramped military office. Now he commanded vessels that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, their hulls rippling with energy that made reality bend around. "Them! Sir, the Keth are trying to retreat," his communications officer reported, her voice steady despite the impossible power flowing through her enhanced neural pathways. "Too late for that," Han replied, his fingers dancing across controls that responded to his thoughts before he even formed them. They wanted to see what humanity could do. Let's show them. The human ships moved like living shadows, phasing in and out of normal space. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, only to appear inside the enemy formation like ghosts materializing from nightmares. The Keth's massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a city, found themselves surrounded by vessels that shouldn't exist. Captain Yoon Jae-min's boarding craft sliced through the hull of the lead Keth warship as if it were made of paper. His soldiers followed him into the breach, their bodies crackling with energy that made the air itself burn. These weren't the same humans who had been tending farms and working in offices just hours before. They moved with impossible speed, their enhanced reflexes allowing them to dodge plasma bolts that moved at the speed of light. "Remember," Yoon called to his team as they carved through the ship's corridors, "we're not here to destroy. We're here to educate." The Keth warriors they encountered were 12 feet tall, covered in natural armor that could stop starship cannons. But against the awakened humans, they fell like wheat before a scythe. Yoon's soldiers didn't even use weapons. Their bare hands tore through alien metal, their eyes burned with stellar fire, and their voices spoke words that made reality itself obey. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Park So-young had become something the galaxy had never seen before. She phased through the outer hull of a Keth command ship, her molecular structure shifting between dimensions. The alien crew never saw her coming. One moment their bridge was secure, the next their commanders were unconscious, their weapons, systems disabled, their ship drifting helplessly. She moved through their vessel like a whisper of death, but she killed no one. Instead, she planted seeds of understanding directly into their minds, showing them memories of what humanity had once been, what they had chosen to become, and why they had hidden themselves away. Across the galaxy, other alien races watched, the battle through their long-range sensors. The proud Vorthan Empire, the ancient crystalline collective, the warrior clans of the Outer Rim, all of them stared in growing horror as they witnessed the return of the species that had once ruled the stars. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Zenthor of the Vorthan fleet. "The humans were weak, they were nothing. We fought them for decades." His tactical officer's tentacles quivered with fear. "Sir, our historical archives, there are gaps. Entire periods where records simply don't exist. What if we never fought the real humans at all?" On the bridge of a ship that existed partially outside normal time, Ambassador Kim Tae-ho raised his hand. The gesture seemed simple, but across space, every weapon in the Keth fleet simply stopped working. Not broken, not destroyed. They ceased to function as if the very concept of violence had been removed from their vicinity. His voice carried across every communication channel in the galaxy, reaching worlds millions of light years away. "Fellow beings of the cosmos, we meet again under unfortunate circumstances." The assembled representatives of the Galactic Council watched from their emergency session, their various forms trembling as they recognized the truth they'd spent millennia trying to forget. "Long ago we were known by many names, the Star Shepherds, the Reality Weavers, the first ones. But you feared us most as the War Gods, beings who could reshape existence with a thought." Kim's form began to change, growing brighter, more terrible, till looking at him directly became impossible. "We saw what our power did to the galaxy. We saw the fear in your eyes, the worship, the desperation. So we made a choice. We sealed away our true nature and went into exile, becoming the weak, divided species you thought you knew. Around the Keth fleet, space itself began to change. Stars that had died millions of years ago flickered back to life. Planets formed from nothing, their surfaces blooming with impossible forests. The laws of physics bent and twisted as humanity's true power awakened. "But you couldn't leave us in peace," Kim continued, his voice now carrying the weight of dying suns. "You pushed and pushed, thinking we were easy prey. You forgot that mercy and weakness are not the same thing." The Keth fleet began to fade, not destroyed but simply ceasing to exist, as if the universe itself had decided they had never been there at all. Their cries of terror echoed across subspace before cutting off into absolute silence. Throughout human space, ordinary people felt the change. The secretary filing reports felt power flowing through her fingertips. The farmer tending his crops looked up to see his plants growing into impossible shapes. The child playing in her backyard watched as her toys began to move on their own, responding to thoughts she hadn't even formed. Humanity was waking up, and the galaxy trembled. Kim's final words rang across the cosmos. The age of hiding is over. We tried to protect you from what we are, but you forced our hand. The choice is yours now. Accept our guidance or learn why the universe once whispered our name in terror. The war gods had returned, and nothing would ever be the same.